see from the title, I am going to show you guys how to install the motor in the B5 S4 today. There are a few things that I'm not going to show you. The fueling system, my fueling system is completely different than, let's say, an OEM or standard, even an RS4 fueling system. I'm running something totally different. Also, the exhaust, I'm not going to show you that either. You guys, I'm sure, could do your own exhaust, and you've done it before. One other thing to mention, these subframe bolts, they're supposed to be one-time use as they're stretch bolts, but let's face it, who's ever replaced these? Some of you probably have, but most of the time I have not. This is a new camera and a new microphone. Hopefully the audio and video are much better. Let me know. But this is what we're going to be working with. If you looked at the last video, you know, the subframe, all that stuff's been taken or loosened. We're missing everything out of the car. Someone stole my motor! I'm just kidding. I was going to go all electric, and you know, I decided not to do that either. You can also see my fueling system's different. I'm running bigger lines, 2 pumps in the tank, single feed fuel line or single feed fuel rails, things like that. So it's a little bit different than what you guys are running. Some of you guys are probably running what I got, but most aren't. Again, if you looked at the removal video, you'll see I had you don't have to evacuate your AC system. You could just put it to the side. It takes a little more work, but then you don't have to go get it recharged. Here's the motor. All buttoned up, ready to go. Some parts. Oops, that's a little bit shiny. That's shiny. And the car is really dirty because it's been sitting. And then you can see, you know, I dumped a lot of parts in here. I cleaned them first. Before we start putting the motor in, we need to prepare, make sure we have all the parts and tools and stuff we need. Because once we have the motor hanging on the cherry picker, we want to get it in and buttoned up as fast as we can. We don't want it left hanging. It's the same thing as if you're lifting your car up with a jack, a hydraulic jack. You don't want to let it sit on that because it's a possibility the hydraulics and the jack could fail while your motor's just dangling. It'll cause a lot of damage. It could be fixed, but make sure you get all your stuff in order and ready to go. Main thing, and you want to get your subframe bolts ready. On the back of the subframe, you have these long 18mm bolts. You have one on each side in the back and one on each side in the front. The backs, you just kind of temporarily put them in there. The subframe can hang a little bit. As long as you get the motor cradled in and it's done, then you can work on all your other peripherals like the axles, the drive shaft, things like that. And then later on come back and tighten everything up or add the Dts Bar, drivetrain stabilizer bar if you have one, or things like that. Another thing you need to watch out for, you guys, is the motor mount sits on top of here, and the motor mount has a little nub that sticks out, and you got to make sure, if you look here, you see how one time I didn't put it in correctly, and it hit this and it broke it off. So as you're putting this up, you got to make sure you twist the motor mount so it fits in one of these holes, preferably towards the front. And then the stud goes through this one in here. All right, I'll get more detail when we get there. You also have these smaller 18s that you need. There are some specialty tools you could use. These are the subframe alignment pins. You don't have to use these. For a long time, I always used 1/2-inch extensions. What's nice about these is if you need to shift the subframe at all, with these being so long, it makes it real easy to shift. Versus these, you can't shift the subframe, it's difficult. They do make a tool to shift the subframe from side to side. I don't have that tool, and that tool is pretty expensive. different ways to install the motor in this car. This is the way I'm doing it and the way I'm showing you. A lot of shops will use a table lift and the whole subframe and everything comes out in one shot. Good for you guys. I thought about it and I just haven't pulled the trigger on a table yet, but eventually I will. This way, most could do this. You don't have to have a lift. You could have your car lifted pretty high on jack stands. That helps. Get the 3-ton ones, the bigger jack stands. You get the car up a lot higher. You will need a cherry picker and a hydraulic jack, a roller jack, preferably 2. I should pick up another one and I have not. If you don't have a load bar, hopefully you know what that is. If you don't have a load bar, I'm not using a load bar. I used one on here before and I didn't like it. I've been using just the chain and the motor tilts a lot, you'll see that. But in the back I'll put a hydraulic or it's a hydraulic jack and or a floor jack, and with a piece of wood, and then just back or lift up the back of it, the motor, and you know, kind of level it out and get it in how I want it. And you guys will see that. We need to make sure the heater hoses are ready to go, meaning these clips are out. And if your car's been sitting for a while, you probably want to lube this. Just going to dab a little bit of this Mobil 1 synthetic grease. Also make sure your CV boots or axles are out of the way. That's why you need to have your uprights, the suspension uprights, loose. That pulls the axles away from when the motor and transmission and everything goes in. It'll keep it not totally away from it. Sometimes it gets hung up on it, but it'll keep it far enough away that you could actually work with it. If you had the uprights all attached, it would be very difficult to get this in doing it this way. Here's my jack, block of wood. If you look, I don't know, it's hard to see. The motor is, I got everything over the subframe. You guys can see that. Get the wire out of the way. That's what it looks like. That's one of the reasons I do the hard angle, to get it up and over that subframe. It makes it easier. If you had a load bar, you'd be angling it anyways. I've had having a good experience with the load bar, so I prefer this way. Make sure there's nothing that's going to get caught. Underneath, and you could see, so like this, we gotta make sure it's on top of the exhaust and on top of the drive shaft when we're pushing it in. And then when this comes back, make sure the exhausts or downpipes don't get caught on the axles, things like that. You just take your time, don't be in a rush. You don't want stuff to hang, but you also don't want to rush it. I'm going ahead and lowering it a little bit. Come back and look at it, make sure everything's good. You can see this is not where it's supposed to be. That's sitting how we want it. Another part you have to watch out for is the transmission mounts. So you got to make sure you get them up and over the axles. That's what the jack in the back helps with. If you guys look in here, you can see I'm clearing the axles. The transmission mount's clearing the axle, and then we could just slowly lower the front and slide everything back. And once we're over these axles, and they go back into the mounts right here, we could start putting all the brackets and bracing in. Again, make sure everything's cleared and not going to get caught on anything. Clutch line, heater hoses, power steering line. You know, keep up and keep checking those things. We're at the point now that you want to hook up your heater hoses. Get those jammed in there. Some guys, you might have chosen not to install the intake manifold, which makes installing a motor a lot easier if you don't have the intake manifold on. It's easier to connect the heater hoses, the clutch line, all that, because you have more room to maneuver your hands and arms in there. But I always suggest before you start bolting things up, get your heater hoses connected and your clutch line, and that'll help greatly. Once everything's in, I'll show you how to bleed the clutch. And make sure when you're putting the heater hoses on, I mean, you wiggle and stuff, and you'll hear the clip click in. If you don't, and when you start your car, it heats up and builds pressure, it'll blow those heater hoses right off, and then you got a mess on your hand, and then you got to try to put them back on. I've done the passenger side heater hose. Let's get the not sure how well you could see this, but the heater hoses are on. And then next we're going to do the clutch line, which you guys most likely will not be able to see. Make sure the clip for the clutch line is loose or off, which it's not. I don't know if you could see that, but all the way down here where my finger's at, the clip is closed, so we're going to have to unclip that. And it's going to be hard to do it with one hand, but we'll try. So this clip needs to be undone, because I forgot to show you guys. Getting the clutch line on will probably be one of the hardest things that you're going to be doing. Everything else is just making sure it's lined up, bolted, and in its right spot. But wiggling your hands in there with the clutch line, it's hard to show on the camera because it's a super tight location to get into. And hopefully some of this video comes through and you can see some of that. All right, so now the clutch line's on, let's go ahead and actually mount the motor. If your car's been sitting for a while and you're figuring out which one's which for the motor mounts, or whatever the hell we call these things again, I forget, it's been a long time. This is the passenger side, driver's side. The passenger side has this little black clip. Again, I'll show you where these go. If you look, again, it's hard to do it with one hand. You look right in there. That's where they go, just like that. And see how you can maneuver stuff around? And go ahead and do that on the other side. So we're looking from underneath, and this is where this mount goes, and see how I have this, and I could move everything around. It's kind of nice. Hopefully this comes through and you guys could see it. If you look, I got the hole right there, and then you remember I told you guys that stud. This one's right there. Make sure it'll line up with the hole. Mine's gonna line up with this one. I'm going to go ahead and put a 13 millimeter on this, a nut. So this wanted to go in. This is where a second jack comes into play. If you were able to lift up on the subframe, it helps. Or you don't want to strip it though, so you got to be careful. Let's go ahead and work on the other side. I kind of have this or I won't. The next thing I gotta do is curve up the transmission with some blocks of wood, so I could. This is where a second jack comes in handy, which I don't have, and I don't know why. I've never bought one. I just haven't. So I gotta block up or crib the transmission so I could take the jack out. I'm going to go ahead and lift the subframe. As you're lifting this, make sure there's nothing in the way that's going to get pinched or broken, and go slow. Now you're not trying to go all the way up, you're just trying to get it in there enough to put these suckers in and have it hang enough that you can move the subframe around and then bolt it up. You just want to get some threads started is what you're looking at. 18 millimeter. With the extension, you just do everything by hand. If you look here, there's the nub. It's in there, you know, right where it's supposed to be. Go ahead and do the other side as well. You don't have to use a jack on the other side. It should lift all of it up at the same time. Not as much. I mean, it's going to be on an angle a little bit, but you should be able to get the bolts in. And again, just do hand tight because you want to be able to shift the subframe around with the motor and everything, get it the way you want it and center it and having it look right. One reason you put those 13 millimeter nuts on the motor mounts is as you lift the motor up, it's going to pull everything up with it. You don't want to do it too much, but just enough to so you get the bolts started. Helps out, the 18 millimeter bolts. Let's go ahead and tighten some of this stuff up a little bit more. Again, not super tight, just tighten it with your hands a little bit. Next, we're going to be doing the transmission mounts. Now, I have aftermarket mounts, so mine mount up a little bit different than the OEM one. The OEM one, you have the mount and then the bolt just bolts straight into it. Mine, it has a nut and a bolt, and you have to connect it that way instead. But it's the same concept. You have to line up the holes. Sometimes a standard screwdriver in there to help move the motor around as you're trying to line everything up helps out a lot. This is where the jack comes into play. It's on the, let's see if we can show it. It's on this on the frame here, and it lifted it up to where it should be high enough that the transmission mount is touching it or it's close to it. And if not, you can lift this up a little bit higher, you know, to get it to where you need to be able to mount the transmission bolts. Hopefully you guys could see this. But here's the transmission mount. Again, mine's a little different. You see how I can't quite get it in the hole? So we will shift it around until we can. Again, I'm not going super tight on these. I just want to get the bolts or the threads started. Let's go ahead and do the other side. Now that the transmission mounts are on, we could go ahead and actually put these other long 18 millimeter bolts into here. We could do these now. Now, again, I'm gonna just go ahead and put these on for right now, the bolts through here, and then later on, some of you guys have just the regular metal piece that goes from here to here. I have a DTS bar, so I'll hook that up later, but for right now, to get everything mounted and correctly installed, I'm going to just go ahead and bolt this in, and then later on I'll put the DTS bar on. Okay, you want to put everything in finger tight. So now's the time. If we need to shift the subframe, if you guys look, you know, it's hard with one hand, but I could shift it to where I need to, from side to side. I kind of like that. I've done this enough. I kind of know kind of where I want it, and I'm happy with that. I just look at the bolts here and how it's set up. Go ahead and do the other side now. I don't have the impact gun on full torque. I just want to get it up there and snug, and then I could tighten everything up later on. Now that the bolts are in for the subframe for the front end, they're in the rear, but not super in there tight, but they're just in there. We'll go ahead and take the cherry picker off. Don't forget to take out the extension, those 1/2-inch extensions that you put in to move the subframe around, and then the cribbing could come out. We're going to do the drive shaft next. One thing you guys need to make sure you do is make sure you guys clean your nuts and bolts. Don't forget your retaining clip and some Loctite. Now you want to put these bolts on tight, but not too tight, because if you strip them, it's not fun getting off. Go back and double check, make sure they're tight, and we'll move on to the next thing. Next is installing this bottom plate. These two bolts, they're 45T. I'm going to go ahead and tighten up these transmission mounts. Again, mine are different than yours, unless you have this manufacturer's transmission mount. Next, I'm going to do the motor mounts. Forget to take these out. I've left mine in, but I need to take them out. We'll go ahead and do this motor mount. Again, don't forget about this. Next, let's go ahead and do the axles. Let's get those put in. Of course, all the best angles are the ones you need to install everything with, but it's what it is. Hopefully you can see this. This is the part that's harder because we have to line it up. And that came Getting a little Loctite. Go ahead and do the other side. I know that we were working underneath. To be able to put the sway bar on, or make it easier to put the sway bar on, we need to put this suspension all back together. It'll just make it that much easier to put the sway bar on. Don't forget to put your level sensor on. Super simple. Do it with one hand. Next we will be putting the outer tie rod on. Now remember to line this. There's a little hole right here, or not a hole, but an indent for this bolt. To get this correctly, there's an Allen key that you put in here, and this could turn. And I'll show you how to do that. And then we need to do these upper control arms. First, we're going to start with the outer tie rod. The reason why this upper control arm was on is when I was doing the axle to keep everything tight, I just stuck that in there to help out. This is for the tie rod, 16mm nut in the specialty. Comes in from the back. Now this flat part is towards the front of the car. And the bolt won't come in, so I use a 10mm Allen on the top, and I turn it until the bolt goes in, like so. Put this 16 on, tighten her down. There's also this 13mm that goes on the top. Next, we'll do the upper control arms, and we have this bolt and nut. A lot of you guys always strip these. That's because when you pull these out, you're not compressing these two control arms down together on this, and it'll strip all these threads off. All right, it's in, 16mm. Driver's side is done. Go ahead and do the passenger side now. Before we put the sway bar on, we want to hook this plastic or this wiring loom up. It'll just make it easier. The sway bar sometimes gets in the way. Some of you guys might be missing this because people often break these. And for good measure, you could run zip ties in here if you want. Next, we're going to be putting on the sway bar. Remember to make sure your bar is lubed on the inside here. If you don't lube this up, it's going to get real squeaky and make a lot of noise. So lube it up. Again, it's hard to do this with one hand. I like to have the cut open part facing up. And go ahead and do the other side. Now you don't need to lube anything else except for what I just showed you. It goes right here. I forgot to take these out. I'll take them out soon. And these are 13 mil. Next, we want to put the ends up, which are these right here, to the up links, and we will use these 16 millimeter on both ends. They come in this direction, so the nut's on the inside. Technically, you're supposed to tighten all this stuff down, all the suspension work down, when the car is sitting at its proper ride height, and it's hard to do. You could jack up, put a jack under here or something like that and compress it and then do it, but then you're only doing one side instead of both at the same time. If you have a 4-post lift and the car's sitting on it, it makes it easier to do this. What I tend to do is just compress it with a jack. It's not the easiest thing in the world to do, but it's doable. I'll go ahead and leave it loose until I can compress this side, and then I'll compress the other side with the jack, and then we'll tighten it up. Let's go ahead and do these. These you can tighten all the way up. This has nothing, no bearing on how it sits. Now that this is compressed, let's go ahead and tighten this. And go ahead and do it on the other side. Next, we're going to put this crossbar in. It goes right here. Hopefully you guys still have yours. A little short. Now, if you guys put all your nuts and bolts in bags and label them, good for you. I don't always do that. Well, actually, I haven't done that in a long time. Now, when you put this back on, you'll see there's a little weep hole right here. That needs to be facing the ground. And it will go like that. Bolts go up, nuts on top. They're 16 millimeter. Belly pan bar. some guys probably don't have this anymore. Again, it takes 2 10mm bolts with pretty wide washers on it. Now you'll see the clip, it goes on, it'll slide on, you know, this way. What you want to have it, the way you want it facing is you want the end of the clip to, when you slide it on, this end facing the front of the car. That way any load is pushing on the bar. If you do it this way, even though there's a hole here, there's always a possibility this could come off. So I always tend to side with caution, and it goes this way, and have the clip facing the front. This next part that we're going to do is the DTS bar, which will go across here and mount to this. Some of you guys may not have one and you just have the metal brackets here, that's fine. You could watch this part, but it won't apply to you. I have the jack and have it holding up the subframe. And go ahead and take these 18mm bolts off. Again, as I stated in the beginning of the video, technically you're supposed to replace all 4 of these as their stretch bolts. I'll give you all the torque numbers. If you guys want the torque numbers and stuff, I'll give you all that for putting these in as we go along. I'm going to put the DTS bar on, and then I will go over the torque numbers and we'll torque some of this stuff down. Now that these are old and stretched, how well they'll work with the torque numbers, probably not, but I'll give them to you anyways. You need these 4 13mm. I like to kind of put these on first, loosely. I have found these on other people's cars stripped out because people put them on too tight. I'll give you the torque numbers for these as well. Just hand, I'm not even tightening them down because I still have to put this on, and sometimes this could be a pain depending on how the motor's moved. Now, let's talk about numbers here. As we're tightening these up, these 18mm bolts here, the long ones, the book calls for 110 Newton meters or 81 foot-pounds plus a quarter turn, 90 degrees. And it's a lot. There we go. And then plus the 90. So since I'm going to go all the way over here, if I can do it. Oh, there's no way. These bolts are pretty old. So you guys could do the quarter turn, put a pole on this. I'll probably end up doing it. Put a pole on this and just go the 90 degrees. These 13mm right here are 23 Newton meters. Don't over tighten. You could strip the threads. The ones up front here, these are 110 Newton meters or 81 foot-pounds. And then these smaller ones up front here that we did earlier, those are 75 Newton meters or 55 foot-pounds. But those you do not stretch. Those stay just as a torque setting. Let's go ahead and get all that done. Need to get a longer extension. Or actually, I could just use this one. Bam. Let me go ahead and take the other side out. So I don't forget. Let's go ahead and do these. Where are we? Right here, 70. 75 Newton meters or 55 foot-pounds. Next, you guys could do your exhaust. I'm not going to show you that. You guys could do your own. Now that you guys have gotten the underside of the car done, hopefully you guys attached the exhaust and that's all taken care of. I know I didn't show you that. There's so many different types of exhaust and downpipes out there. I'm sure you guys, if you're putting a motor in, you could hook up the exhaust. But everything else under there is tight, torqued down correctly. We are going to start topside now. We're going to bleed the clutch. I will not be able to show you how to bleed the slave cylinder. It's just way too tight in there. A few things that really help get your hands in there, because it is a tight fit, is if you don't have the intake manifold on and the spider hose is removed. Right now I have the spider hose removed on mine, and that just, it'll make it easier to cram my hands in there and bleed it. Now, there's things called gravity bleed. You could put a pan underneath the car and open this and just let it gravity bleed. I've heard of people doing it that way. I like to actually open the valve, go in the car, push the clutch pedal in with my hand. It'll stick to the floor, and then I go back up here, tighten this, not all the way tight, just close. You could actually finger tighten. Slowly lift the clutch pedal up, come back out, loosen this up, go back and tighten, and just do it a few times and you'll get most of the air out and you'll be good to go. If you don't loosen that 9mm fitting before you put the motor back in, it could be a real pain in the butt. I just had to do it, I didn't show you. A lot of expletives and crap like that. But I did get it loose. So make sure you guys do it before you put the motor back in. Loosen that 9mm, make your life a lot easier. You still gotta cram your hand in there and it's kind of a pain, but it's easier to do once it's broken loose. So right now, clutch pedal's up and the valve is closed. What I'm gonna do is open the valve, and then I'm gonna go and push the clutch pedal down to the floor. Don't like force it all the way down, but just, you know, just push it down to the floor. And then I'll come back over here, I'll tighten the valve closed or close it, and then I'll go back and slowly pull the clutch pedal up. And you'll probably have to repeat this a few times. It just depends on how much air was in the system. And again, this is tight. It's not easy on your hands. I could hear it dripping into the pan. And then next, I'll walk you over here if you could just see. I'll push this in. And then I'm gonna go ahead and tighten the valve. Remember that valve is plastic, so don't over tighten it. Just tighten it. Tighten it so it's tight, but don't like crank on it. Let's go back and pull the pedal up. I'm just gonna slowly grab the pedal. Oh, wrong one. And just slowly pull it up. All right, give it a second, and then check it. So my pedal's actually good the one time around. Oh yeah, I only had to do it once and it's working. I gravity bled my slave cylinder, and then I also did it manually. I only had to do it one go around, but you may have to do it a bunch of times. If it still doesn't work, gravity feed again, let it sit longer. Make sure you don't let the reservoir go dry either. Keep checking that. And just keep doing it until you feel comfortable, until you get the pedal where you want it. It's not going to be super stiff. The pedal should come up most of the way. It doesn't necessarily have to come all the way, but it needs to come up the majority of the way. After that, let's go ahead and clean that up with all the brake fluid. Make sure you have proper ventilation. Now that the clutch feels great and you have it done, let's go ahead and install the AC compressor. Now I do have some extra stuff on here. I have an oil cooler, so if you guys look, you might see some different things on here. To put the compressor back in, along with the lines, you have to remove the oil in the car and the oil filter. I showed you this in the engine removal video, and it's just the same process in reverse. And sorry for all the noise, it's laundry day. Another issue you guys are going to run into is the coolant feed tube for the reservoir up top. And this gets in the way too. If you work at it, you can move it out of the way and get the compressor in. It's just sometimes a pain in the butt to do. And again, this should be loose from the removal video. See how I was able to get it past that? Some people struggle with that. There we go. I'm gonna go ahead and put the oil filter back on just loosely. I will be replacing this when I add oil to the car. I just keep it on there right now to keep oil from dripping everywhere. And it just has to go on kind of hand tight, not very tight. Hopefully you guys bagged and labeled your bolts, nuts and bolts. If you didn't, it takes 3 13mm bolts, and this is what they look like. 2 up front and then 1 from behind and up. You'll have to go between all these hard pipes and everything. It could be a mess. It could be hard to do. This is what I'm using. It's the 1/4 inch drive, so it fits a little bit better length, and then it's up to you guys how you want to do it, but you have to get it in there and tighten it up. And then a 13mm gear wrench. It could be fun to get these bolts in, especially the one over here. My suggestion, bring it up forward, and then you can shove it in, just like that. The body that you screw these bolts into is aluminum, so just be careful not to cross thread it. I've had to replace a few of these on people's cars because they try to shove the bolt in there and cross thread. Just, you know, use your finger and tighten it, and if it starts catching on threads, then you're good to go. Just don't force it. All right, they're started. The third one you could do after you bolt these 2 up. There's probably a Torx spec for it, but that's normally what I do. With it being a 13mm bolt, my guess is it's between 15 and 20 Newton meters. Let's go ahead and do the one underneath. I don't know if you guys can see it, but the hole's right there. And that's it on the AC compressor. We're going to be putting on the hard pipe. It goes right here. Blah, blah, blah. I'm missing a clamp. I'm going to have to go find my clamps. These are the 13mm hex bolts, just in case you didn't put your stuff in a bag. You have 2 of them. Let me get the other clamps that I'm missing. All right, I got my clamps, my clamp pliers. These come in handy. Put that one right there. Now, if these coolant lines are super ballooned and super soft, you're going to need to replace them as they've gone bad. Make sure none of the clamps, the edges are touching any of these hoses. It could puncture them pretty easily. Just loosely put it in there, and let's get this pipe in. Once everything's tightened up, and if you push it on here, you can see none of these are riding against the metal clamp. None of the hoses are. Go ahead and get this one done. I could go find the clamp. There's probably a torque setting for this. If it's a 13 millimeter, it's probably 15 to 20 Newton meters. Sometimes it's 25, but I go on the side of caution. I would do between 15 and 20 if you really want to torque it down. I just kind of do hand tight because again, you're going into aluminum. You got to be careful. You don't want to over tighten that. And again, it's just holding a bracket. It's not really under any kind of pressure. Next, we're going to do the snub mount bracket. Snub mount bracket, and then there's 3 of these bolts, hex bolts. These also have a torque setting, but again, I never torque them down. I just kind of go tight, and that's it. Next, we're going to put this hard line on with the clamp. This is for the power steering reservoir, and then I went ahead and filled it with this stuff. I think you can find these things at local auto parts stores now. Just make sure you get the correct stuff. If you notice, I did not put the belt on because we're going to manually bleed this system. That way we don't get a lot of air in it when we turn the car over. You'll still get a little bit of foaming, but not much. Hey, dum-dum, you didn't connect the back hard lines. I know I didn't do that. What we're going to do is put some paper towels back there and spin this pulley and push most of the air out through there. And that way you're not pushing a ton of air through the whole system. You're just going to push some air through the whole system, if you know what I mean. If you guys look, this is how it's set it up. You see the line comes up. We'll just leave it open like this for right now and try to push the fluid through. Make sure you guys keep an eye on your fluid. You don't want it to run dry. Fluid's coming out. I'm going to go ahead and connect this. I believe it's a 17 and a 19 or an 18 and a 19. And a 17. Now when you turn the pulley for the power steering, just make sure it's not leaking. Now we're going to push the air through the rest of the system and try to get it out and just have power steering fluid in. Don't let it drain. And just keep going until you hear all the air has been taken out of the system. The key here is just to get most of the air out of the system. That way this thing doesn't foam like crazy when you turn the car on. I'm going to leave it at that and we'll head off to the next thing. Let's go ahead and connect the main wiring harness. Now I have a few different connectors in here that you guys you'll notice aren't on your car. And that's because I have some weird wiring stuff that I did that you guys don't need. And they're color coordinated, so I have an extra wiring loom. I've added stuff throughout the years, and that's one of the things. It's pretty simple. You just have to match up the wires or the plugs and push them down, and they should click right in. Next, we're going to go ahead and install, we are going to install this wiring loom, and we'll go ahead and do the other side as well. Hopefully you guys didn't fully take it apart and it's easy just to slap it back on. There'll be a few different things, like I have a fuel line in the way, so mine will be a little bit more difficult or look a little different than how you guys will have it set up. It uses these 8mm little nuts. do have a tie down here that's going to tie this to the firewall. Some of these are broken, or the car's old enough that these ties are all gone by now. You could order these. You got to be careful with this area. There's a lot of old brittle wiring, especially these cars are so old. So just try not to manhandle things too much, but you know, you got to move stuff around. And it may look kind of like a mess. Again, I have a wire tie right here again, but the reservoir goes over most of this, so you won't see a lot of this once it's done. So I do have some shielding down here. This is actually original. It might be missing from your car. You could purchase these pieces as well. And I like to use it. I have them on both sides. If you look, I have it there and I have it there. They're right over the downpipes, and I still have the OEM downpipe shields on my car as well. Without these shields, a lot of guys like to not run them. It just bakes these wires. The block for the grounding cables. A lot of you guys are probably missing or totally broken. That's okay. After all that, remember that hard pipe we did below when we did the AC compressor? How it's loose? Let's go ahead and tighten that back in. It's a 13 millimeter. It's kind of a pain to do to get it threaded correctly. I've seen a lot of those where they're cross-threaded because people just jam them in there. You should be able to use, finger tight it and then use a little ratcheting 13 millimeter ratcheting wrench on it, and that would help out. Try not to strip it. Sometimes to get this in, you'll have to loosen the other 13 millimeter bracket. It just depends. I would go ahead and do the fuel lines next. Of course, I'm missing all that on this car. I do have the charcoal filter return, which I will be hooking up. It goes right here. But you guys are on your own on this one. I can't show you, as I have a totally different fuel system than what's on a stock S4. Don't forget to connect some, like your N75 valve, and if you have any wiring over here that's loose or needs to go somewhere, don't forget to connect it all. Just kind of pour over it and look. Charcoal canister. I still run it. Let's go ahead and install the spider hose assembly. And it's going to be fun because I got a lot of fuel stuff in the way. This is the second gen, or the second version of this spider hose. I highly suggest you get it. You could get aftermarket ones, but the OEM one always seems to fit correctly. I've installed other ones from other companies and they don't always work. Now if you go with a catch can, you probably want to go with the aftermarket one, as you can modify it a little bit easier than you can with the OEM one. Go ahead and put the serpentine belt back on. You could spin this a few more times if you want. Make sure power steering level is full. .17 millimeter socket. I do have a bolt in this hole. That was just holding this spring back from totally releasing. Make sure everything looks good, and then just give it a little touch and we're good to go. Put on the plastic covers next. Don't forget to do your vacuum lines if you have the boost gauge or anything like that. Don't forget to connect all that. On the 2000 and 2001, it has a little bit different connection hose. If you look, this is different. On an 01.5 and a 2002, this is a different setup. It actually comes around and it connects down in, on the side here. On this car, it's going to be right here. Go ahead and connect your diverter valves. Next, we're going to connect the ground strap. 13mm, has a cap on it. And I do have one of the original clips for right here for this. You guys may or may not have it. And it stays loose, you don't make it tight. And you could zip tie this over here if you want. I usually leave this loose until I put the airbox in. Go ahead and install the fan controller. Just takes two 10mm nuts. Install the Y pipe next. It doesn't have to go on super tight. This only sees vacuum. Takes 3 10mm bolts. Go around and make sure you got everything connected. I forgot to install this piece, which I'm going to do right now. Hopefully I could stick my hands underneath the Y pipe and get it in there. That was a mistake. I make them every once in a while. Now, some of the, or 2000 and 2001 do not have these. It's a different setup. It's just a line that comes off the intake manifold to the brake booster. I've upgraded mine over the years, and I'm using the 2001.5 to 2002 piece. Let's install the coolant reservoir. We want the hose to go in between the heat shield and the chassis, so in here somewhere. Not near the exhaust, but on the other side. Connector. Mine's a little broken, but still clicks in. Make sure to tuck everything nice and out of the way. Next is to install these 3 screws. Most likely, or more than not, these won't be screws for you guys. There'll be some other type of bolt. These typically get lost, And it's a rarity to actually have the screws that came with this. Next, we're going to do the accordion hose and the map. And since I modified my car from a 2001 intake to actually this is RS4, but I also put this intake vacuum line in too, just to keep it factory. Let's install the airbox next. Make sure these feet actually push into the chassis. Your O-ring, make sure you lube it up a little bit with some grease. Make your life a lot easier. The air intake on my car is a little bit different than OEM S4. All the stuff on my car is all RS4 parts, so there's a few things that you're not going to have to do. One thing you will have to do is you'll have clamps here, these big old clamps. So if you had those pliers I showed you earlier, those things work great. Before I push this all the way down, I'm going to go ahead and put the bolts in here for the RS4 MAF and airbox. In case you're wondering what they are, just regular Torx bolts. Top one's super easy to do. And that's a little tricky is the one underneath, and that's why I wait to push this box down so I get my hand and my socket in there. Are lined up. Much better. Smooth as butter. It will require a big black washer, rubber gasket, and then a 10mm nut. Rubber first. Large washer. Ignition amplifiers if you have them. This wire actually comes and sits in this channel, and then there's actually supposed to be a clip right here that this connects to. My airbox doesn't have it, so I usually just zip tie it right here. Not really tight per se, just, you know, you can still move the wire if you need to. At this point, airbox, everything's on. White pipe, reservoir. Gonna have to work on the wiring a little bit. On 2000 through 2001, the wiring loom is different than a 2001.5 to 2002. Depending on what you have, the 2001.5 to 2002 have a plate that goes right here, and there's only four connections, I believe, for the wiring loom, versus the older cars have a bunch more wiring connectors than the remodeled one, not remodeled, but the newer versions. I generally do not do any of the connections on this until most of the front end's done. I'll leave the headlight off and this intercooler hose off, and then I'll do these connections. That way I can make it nice and tidy. Otherwise, there's still the front radiator support with all the cabling that still needs to be connected to this, so I like to leave this open and do that wiring after. One thing I forgot to mention is if you guys have a clutch fan, you'll need to install that. You could do that anytime. You could have done it, I would do it after you install the motor, just because there's an easy chance you're going to break it. But anytime after the motor has been put in, you can put your clutch fan in. I probably would do it about right now is when I would put a clutch fan in. My next little thing I need to install is my oil cooler. As I'm going to install the intercoolers next, so I got to get this oil cooler first bolted in. I need the access to get in here, and if I put the intercooler right here, I won't be able to get in. One thing to make sure when installing the intercoolers is make sure you clean all the grease and grime off of these fittings, as well as on the hard pipes too. The last thing you want is these just to pop off when you're under boost. So make sure you guys use some brake cleaner or something like that to get all the grease and stuff off of these things. Another trick I like to use is these are the radiator support bolts, and I just push them through here onto these. Now these are Er Intercourse stock ones. You know, it's going to be a little different than how I'm installing these, but it's almost the same concept. Make sure your lines are on the inside of this hose. Now we can do the things underneath. You don't want this metal pipe pushed up against this one. You want to, give it a little room to move around. Make sure these bolts aren't too low that they'll hit the belly pan. Again, I don't connect this piece until towards the end, only because of all the wiring I need to still do. This side we'd go ahead and mount. There's two different size clamps. The big one goes over here. Same with this hose. There's a big side and a small side. Big side goes towards the motor, small side goes towards the intercooler. Now this is where you could tweak it. See, if you look, this hose is sitting on top of the subframe and it could cut it, so we could twist it so it doesn't hit it. The problem with this side with the AC is the bumper always has a gap right here, or it's pulled out. It's because there's just so much crap in this area, and you have such a big intercooler that it just pushes on the bumper, and it's hard to get this side aligned correctly. Intercoolers are on, or sort of on, especially driver's side. I'm going to go ahead and start installing the radiator support, and I'll show you a few tricks with that. On the radiator support, you have all these cables and wires you need to hook up, and you need to leave this unit loose. Use the bumper bolts. They actually make a tool that you could slide in onto these holes here, but these work just as great. Again, we just wanted to temporarily hold this radiator support in while we do our work. Nice and loose. We could do our wiring, keep wiring out of the way so it doesn't get pinched, things like that. One thing we need to install is this sensor into here, and this is why we leave this loose. It helps out. Make sure we lube up the O-ring. If the O-ring is rock hard, replace it. Go in here. Alright, it's on there. Let's go ahead and put the clip on. Make sure this clip is seated all the way. I know from experience that if you don't, and when it builds pressure, it'll just blow this sensor right out. So make sure you check it. Perfect. Okay, next we're going to want to lube these O-rings in here, and also release this clip, pull it out just a little bit. So when we put the radiator in, it makes it easy. If you look, the clip is out. This is in, ready to go. Snub mount, what we're going to do is when we put the, make sure it sits on there correctly. The wiring out of the way. Again, this is a 2000, so this is going to look different than a 2001.5. Make sure wiring and cabling's out of the way. Now, if you have fog lights, make sure these go underneath, like so. Do it on this side. You're going to pull these bolts out before you put the radiator support on. I always take this off because it always ends up broken if you don't. You can just let that dangle. Same with the fan. Just make sure you don't pinch any wiring when you put this all back in. Before we put this on, make sure you guys get all your bolts, Torx ones. They're the big fat washers, and then the two side ones, they're kind of a smaller washer. The worst thing you could do is pinch a line. Take that off. Take the bolt off on this side. Do the top ones up here. We're not tightening them down, just finger tight, so that this could still move. Now, I could mount this bolt in here, and what I'm going to do is just lift up with my knee. And try to get it into this hole. Again, not super tight, but later on when we're ready to go install, we'll push this up a little bit, not so it crushes this fog light wire, but just enough that, you know, it's still movable, but this is up. See, I can move this however I want, and I'll probably twist it like that. So there's different ways that we need to set it, but we're not there yet. Again, go through, make sure you don't have any wires that could be pinched. Now that we got these on here, let's go ahead and put these, we could take these bumper bolts off. Next, we're going to install the radiator support bolts, T45s. Now, I cannot install a bolt here because it'll hit the intercooler, and vice versa on the other side, but I can install on every other hole. Again, I'm going to check for any electrical wires or anything that could be pinched one more time, just to make sure before we actually mount this in here pretty tight. Alright, I like to kind of lift up on it and then tighten these. Good and tight. Same with this side. Lift it up a little bit. Let's go ahead and do these smaller. I think these are T27 or T25 Torx bolts. Let's go get those put in correctly. So to put these in, I like to align them, make sure these washers are covering these holes. And if you need to shift this over, you know, I've shoved a screwdriver in here and you could kind of move this around. This looks good. Go ahead and do the other side. See how these are off? Let's go ahead and do the intercoolers now. I like to push up with my knee. Let's do adjustable. And I'll go ahead and do the other side. Radiator supports in. I'm going to go ahead and install my hood latch just in case the hood accidentally closes. It's hard to see, but stick it in here. Like that, and then we push this far in with black piece with a screwdriver. And if you guys are awesome, you still have these clips. Most likely you guys don't. goes like that. And then of course, hood latch is on. On to the next thing. We'll put the radiator on next. Again, this one, we need to lube this. And open the clip. Just a little bit of lube. You still have all the pieces. You have the air dam top and bottom. The rubber pieces. And to get this in, you just have to lift up in that way. And this will go right in. And you have the clips. And put this on. Clip a little bit and just until you click on it. And we'll go ahead and do underneath as well. Make sure you listen for it to click. One thing I missed when we were doing the AC is this clamp. So I'm going to go ahead and put this on. I have residual oil under here, you guys. It's all right. This is loose, so all the oil just trickled all the way over here. It's my rust prevention. I'm going to go ahead and put the condenser on. There's a clip here for the pressure switch. Next, I'm going to do these brackets with the fan. These are the brackets, and then 4 10mm bolts. Next, we're going to go ahead and put this sucker up here. Now, if you're a Canadian car, I don't think you have this fan or this bracket. Here are the air dams. This side's drivers, passengers, and then I don't know if here's a clip I need. And then here are the 2 tiny Phillips screws. This clip we'll use in a second when we're actually installing this stuff. So this is going to go on with a, it's going to be tight fit, of course it always usually is. There we go. Bracket, 10 mil. You got to make sure this bolt doesn't go into the radiator either. They're usually long, so if you're screwing it in, just be very wary of that, or conscious of that. Okay, and I don't want this to rub up against the oil cooler, so I'll kind of bend it to fit a little better. There we go. And then later on I'm going to button all this up as well. I'm going to zip tie these lines to make them nice and neat. Go ahead and do over here. Again, this is, see how the line doesn't fit in? It's a tight fit with, but these slide. This clip that I was talking about goes right here. There we go. Keeps the wires nice and tight and out of the way. Go ahead and tighten this. All right. Tighten these lines and zip tie it all up to this. Going to go ahead and install the shroud. Again, if you have stock intercoolers, this will be different. Go ahead and do the other side now. Go ahead and install the snorkel. Takes 2 Phillips. Install the weather stripping. Now I still have these little holders in here, which are kind of nice. Generally, these are probably lost by now. I went ahead and wired the harness up. This is what it looks like on a 2000 to 2001 S4. I went ahead and put the intercooler hose on as well. I mean, I didn't need to show you guys all this, but this is what it looks like when it's wired up correctly. We're going to go ahead and install the shifter. I believe I went over this in one of my older videos, but I will review it for you guys. This is an aftermarket shifter, old style shifter. First, we're going to make sure everything's well lubed. This is loose. T20. There we go. There's this one, and then you see all the way down here, that's how you want it. So let's go ahead and put those in. This is the top one. It's a little shorter. Has a washer. I'm just getting this stuff started. I'm not tightening them down. This one could be a little tricky. Sometimes having a magnetic stick helps. Next, let's do these 4 10mm. There's 2 here, and then there's 2 back here. We'll lift the whole box up, and we'll have to shift it to get it in here. Just like that. And again, I may look like I'm struggling, but that's because I have the camera in my way. So I could show you guys. We'll go do the ones back here, which they're not lined up right. There we go. Again, it's these 10 mils with this fat washer. Everything's in there, loose, but it's in. Right? Let's go ahead and tighten these 10s. Next, we'll do this top shifter. I kind of like to, if you look at the old stuff, you can kind of see where it used to go. So I kind of put it in that same spot, right around there. I'm sure there's a precise measurement per Audi, but I just go with what was used to be there. I don't change it very much, just right in the middle. Go ahead and tighten. And then the shifter, so you could get a degree counter if you want. It's supposed to be, I think it's 9 and 2, so 9 degrees back and or 2 degrees to the side. I'll put it in the description below, or right here. So it has to be off to the side a little bit and back just a little bit, and that's how you know it's correct. It's never straight up and down. It's back a little bit and to the passenger side just a tad. And that's usually where you want to start. If you have problems shifting, it's not always the alignment of the shifter. Sometimes your transmission just sucks and it needs to be rebuilt, especially if it has lots of miles. And then to test this, just go ahead and push the shift knob on. Straight up and down, so that's 3rd and 4th, 1st, 2nd, 5th, 6th. What you're looking for is making sure this bar does not hit the side, because that'll prevent you from shifting. And then we'll check reverse. So that all works perfect. Just like that, first time around. I've done a ton of these, so I have a feel for how they're supposed to go. And you could try tightening them down a little more if you need to. Go ahead and put the sound deadening on it. Now, interesting enough, Audi still sells these. Mine was super trashed and the foam was pretty much gone. And I was like, I wonder if they sell these things. And I went there, and sure enough, you could still buy these things. At the time of this video, I don't know, if this video is around in 20 years, you might not be able to get it still. But at the time of this video, I was able to get a new one of these. Again, it's these fat washers. And I do believe I have a video somewhere around here that on my site that shows you how to do this. There you go, the shifter's in. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, reverse. Perfect. Go underneath your car, make sure everything's tight. You put in a new oil filter if you, hopefully you already done that. Make sure everything's tight and cleaned up underneath. That way when you put the oil in and you start the car, you can look to see if there's any leaks. I will not be putting the belly pan back on. There's a few things I'm going to leave off until I start the car and run it for a little bit, and then I could get back underneath and check to make sure we're leak free. Hopefully we're leak free, and then we could put things back together, like the plastic engine covers, or if you have the carbon fiber ones, either one. I'll put that stuff back on after the car's running. I'm making sure there's no fuel leaks or anything weird going on, and everything looks a-okay. Then the dress up stuff will go back on. This may be review for you guys, but I think I've done an oil change video before, and I used the Mobil one, the turbo diesel oil, the 5-40. You can use different types of oils. This has worked for me for all the years I've owned this car, and I've been happy with it. You guys could choose the oil of your liking. Since I have a oil cooler, external oil cooler on this car, it'll take more than the standard 6.5 quarts. I'll probably do 7 to 7.5 quarts, but I'm going to start low. So I'll start with the 6.5, and then I'll check the level, give it time to sit. If it looks good, I will start the car with that, and then after the car cools down, I'll come back and check it again. Pretty full. I know you guys seen this video of my, it's called an Airlift. To fill your system with your coolant. Works really well. I highly suggest it, especially if you do a lot of these cars, or any car for that matter. If it's a one-off situation, you could do it the old-fashioned way where there's a bleed hole right there. It's a hex, you take that off, or you loosen it, and then you start filling this, and it pushes the air out. And you keep filling it until fluid comes out of there. I think I went over this in the video that showed how to do all this stuff. Here's my premix. I went over all that in the video as well. I know we're getting to the end here, and this video is probably super long. So I'm trying to move a little quicker right now. And then you let it sit there for a minute or so to see if the gauge moves. When everything's all good, just go ahead and flip the valve. Now on this, it can overfill it. So from experience, I don't let it go all the way down to 0. I let it go down most of the way, and then I just fill as needed. Overfilling sucks. It's hard to get the fluid out unless you have like a turkey baster or something like that. But this is a great tool, and at the end of the day, after putting a motor in, you're super tired and you don't want to burp the system. This makes life easy. car is almost done, we need to turn the motor over a bunch of times to get the oil through the turbos, build up the oil pressure, the coolant will run through a little bit too, same with the power steering fluid. Hopefully we'll get some of the air out while we're doing it. Make sure your battery is well charged to do this so you don't kill the battery. Do not plug in the ECU. If you look, I don't have the ECU plugged in. We're going to turn the car over. Of course you're going to get engine codes and things like that, and hopefully if you're pulling a motor you have a VADCOM and you guys could clear it and do all that stuff later on. One thing I forgot to tell you guys, hopefully you don't gloss over it, or I kind of glossed over it, is after you charge the battery, make sure you connect everything up, all the connectors on the battery. That way the car will start, or it'll turn over. And hopefully you have a nice strong battery after charging, that you don't have any low battery issues. After you turn over the motor a few times, go through and check your oil level. We'll give it a few minutes to settle, and then check your oil level. Check your power steering level. Not in that order that I'm doing it in. Just go through and check things out, make sure it looks okay. And then after that, we'll go ahead and connect the ECU and start the car. Let's go ahead and install the front bumper. Now, I'll probably make a follow-up video to this. A lot of you guys are complaining about the passenger side of the front bumper where it sticks out or the bumper doesn't sit correctly. That's a very, 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 very common problem with these cars. It's actually not this bad, but it's not good either. A lot of it has to do with the AC lines that are under here and the condenser, not the condenser, the dryer. Especially if you have aftermarket intercoolers, those intercoolers are pushing those AC lines down and in turn pushes on this bumper, which causes it not to fit right. You can see I got mine in, but if you look, see it's not flush, but it is pretty tight. So I don't know if that's a fender issue or it's just the bumper from all that crap underneath there. The bigger intercooler pushing on everything is causing it to push out. But it's in, and it's a kind of a pain in the butt to get in. Don't forget to put these two 6mm hex bolts back in. You're familiar with these. We use these to hold the radiator support when we were installing the motor. Remember? I got two different colors, but that's all right. I've noticed sometimes when you're putting these in, you can't get them to start. Swap them. Try swapping them. I've done that before, and it's actually solved the problem. Also at this time, you reach under here and connect the fog lights if you have them. One thing I did forget to mention is I don't have the line that connects from the windshield reservoir to these headlight washers, so don't forget to put that on there. I have all that removed on this car. Next we'll put the grills on, or the side grills. They go on pretty easy. People have problems with these sometimes. Just make sure they're all the way on. See, this isn't all the way on. There, that looks better. Go do the other side. And there you have it. Next are the headlights. There's a few things on the headlights I want you guys to look at. Make sure it still has this tab on it. It still has this tab and these two top tabs. They do make repair kits for these two top tabs, but these bottom ones, they do not. On the radiator support, you gotta make sure there's a few things as well. Make sure you have this piece. It's actually a long Torx that goes in there. And then same with this, make sure you have this. That's what that one underside piece slides into. Here are the Torx bits. Here's the long one. A lot of these are always missing. And then here are the two top short ones. And it's a T27, I believe. T30. Now to do this right, you kind of down underneath. And then you have to slide the unit this way and kind of in. That way you get that little knob that's underneath into that clip. There we go. Next, we will put the long Torx in. It helps to have a magnet. And then we'll just reach down. You have to get a flashlight to look and get this into the hole and start getting it started. It won't put it all the way in, but just enough that you can take the magnet off. Once you get it started, go ahead and adjust how you want the headlights. Go ahead and tighten them down. Go ahead and do the other side. Headlights are installed. Next, let's install the ECU. Before we install the ECU, we probably want to install these Torx bits. There's three of them. There's one here, and one here. They are on both sides, so go ahead and do those first, and then we'll do the ECU. Next, we're going to do the ECU. It's pretty straightforward. Do these clips, clip. Make sure it fits in here all nice and your accessories don't get crushed. ECU is in. Put the top on. A lot of guys do not put the bolt on that's back here or the one on the side here. That's how you can tell an amateur from a pro mechanic is. You'll go to these cars and look at them and it'll be missing the 8mm bolts in the back on this ECU cover. Put them on. Thank you. It also helps to have the right tools. 8mm gear wrench works wonders. Same with this. Now if you need more headroom here, you could take this clip off for the the cowl, and there's one more over here. If you still have those clips, a lot of them are missing. Yes, it does take extra time to do this bolt. Now, I'm not going to put the cowl on or any of the engine covers or the belly pan until the motor's been running for a little while and I've driven it around. I could check for leaks and things like that. So now at this point, we'll just start the car. And for some of you guys, if there's no fuel in the fuel lines or the pumps don't prime or the pump doesn't prime, it might take a lot of cranks for the motor to start up. It might sputter a lot, it might smoke. So just remember, sometimes it takes a while for the car to start. Now, after the car's starting and it gets hot, it's gonna smoke a lot. And just look around, check for leaks, things like that, and that smoke is not actually a fire. Keep a fire extinguisher around as well. When I start motors, I always have a fire extinguisher sitting right near it, so it's ready to go just in case. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I'm sorry it was super long, but that's the nature of the beast on these videos. They're always long. They do take a long time to produce, so please subscribe and please watch the ads too. That helps pay for this stuff. It helps pay for my tools, things like that. Until next time, keep on wrenching, guys.